I'm going to steal the reins back from you for just one moment, and then I'll have you share again. But for anybody new that jumped on, my name is Matt Lovett. I'm an agronomist with Albert Lea Seed. Thanks very much for joining us today for our first day of our 2021 annual conference on forages. Really appreciate you all taking time out of your days to be with us here today virtually. And we're going to get started here.
A couple minutes ago, but yeah.
Yeah. With Kevin Shelley from University of Wisconsin talking about double crop forage production with small grains and corn. So this will be kind of a good jumping off point with our last panel discussion on incorporating cover crops. It seems like the consensus was from our previous panels that they make more sense in a row crop rotation. So this will be a kind of a good stepping stone to that.
You're going to have to be quiet though.
Just as a reminder, we are keeping everyone muted during this presentation to minimize distractions for our presenters. But we do want to make this as interactive as possible. So please, if you have questions during this final talk here, please type them into the chat bar below. And then make sure you have everyone selected so the question goes to everyone so everyone can see it. And I will moderate those questions and get those answered. I will say too, we do have a program that's happening tomorrow from same time from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Central Standard Time all about small grains. So we'd encourage you to join us tomorrow as well if you have the time. Another packed program from both folks with Albert Lea Seed and then various topics about raising the particulars of small grains. So if you have to leave us early, I want to say thank you again. Just as a reminder, we are recording all these presentations and we will put them up on our website, hopefully within a couple weeks after this wraps up here. So if you missed it or if you want to share or review, you can go on our website and look back there. So with that, I'll hand things over to Kevin and we can get going.
Thank you, Matt, and thanks to Albert Lea Seed House for having me today. Sorry, I got to get my screen kind of lined up. Thank you. So my name is Kevin Shelley. I'm an outreach educator with the University of Wisconsin Nutrient and Pest Management Program. We're a outreach program that kind of works in between the research specialists at UW-Madison and Extension and county extension offices, land and water conservation departments, VOTEC schools, agribusinesses, a lot of partners to develop educational programs for farmers and everybody else that's involved on managing agricultural production in a manner that protects water quality was the focus we were instilled with when we were started about 30 plus years ago. So at one point along the line, I was asked to do some work on planting winter cereal rye after corn silage as a cover crop and potentially a forage crop. And somehow it's turned into a significant part of my career. So I just wanted to share some things on that. Margaret asked me, she knew a little bit about that and asked me to share some things today. So that's what I hope to do. Corn silage. In Wisconsin, we have about 1 million acres of corn as silage each year. It's about half of that in Minnesota or Iowa. Wisconsin is number one actually in acres of corn harvested as silage. And just going to try to sorry, here it is. I don't know if that video clip will play. Corn silage is a good way to produce a high yield of digestible nutrients for feeding cattle of various types on a per acre basis. And it's pretty efficient. You plant it once, you harvest it once, large tonnage, lots of energy, good fiber. The problem with corn silage is it removes the entire plant from the field. So it doesn't really leave much by way of residue to protect the soil. And often this is a place where, we're going to put manure after corn silage harvest. And so it can be a situation vulnerable to soil erosion and nutrient runoff. And so planting a overwintering crop, which at this time of the year is probably going to be a winter cereal grain, and really rye or triticale are probably the best options in terms of quick establishment, good tillering in the fall, and fast stem elongation and growth in the spring. And so it can provide good cover, and there's also potential to use it as an early season forage crop. If we can get that forage crop off early enough, we still have adequate time for a full season crop to follow. And so in that way, double cropping may provide an extra crop or may provide extra forage. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then this way it adds value to the cover crop as well. So I try to, being from an educator that is charged with helping farmers and land managers be good stewards of the environment. And in that we have a lot of corn silage. One of the things I really have to emphasize in my work is what are the conservation benefits. And here is just a bit of an example. This is some modeling using the SNAP Plus nutrient management and conservation planning tool that we use quite a bit in Wisconsin. And one of the things it does, and beyond just helping a farmer take account of soil test values and meeting nutrient needs with manures and balancing fertilizers with manure and legume credits, is it will estimate using Russell II soil loss estimating software will estimate soil loss. And then we also have a phosphorus index tool that we use in Wisconsin, which is a kind of a general measure of edge of field phosphorus losses. And so what I have here are 4 different soils in Wisconsin. Plano silt loam and ringwood silt loam are common kind of in the south central part of the state, and Ottawa and Fairports are 2 that are more common up in the northeastern part of Wisconsin. Those are 2 areas of the state where we grow a lot of corn silage. And comparing in the columns there where it says estimated soil loss, looking at corn silage just for that year, often we're going to have an estimated soil loss that exceeds what NRCS would consider to be tolerable, of 5 tons per acre for the first 2, 3, and 2 for the Ottawa and Fairport. And if we add a winter rye forage in our rotation scenario, we can get that estimated soil loss down below T so that we can meet our conservation objectives, at least in terms of meeting certain agricultural compliance programs and that sort of thing. Phosphorus index needs to be below 6 for the rotation. And you can see that winter rye forage added to the corn silage does help get us down on phosphorus losses too. And there are some watershed programs. Jason mentioned the watershed program that he's involved with. There are some in the state that are using the SNAP Plus to really kind of track progress with some of the program implementation they have, and will can estimate the pounds of phosphorus loss reduced accordingly. So just a little background on the information I'm going to present today. I am an outreach specialist. I'm an academic staff. I'm not actually a faculty with a research program. So a lot of the work I do is kind of on-farm demonstrations. I do some work at the Arlington Research Station in south central Wisconsin, just north of Madison, and I'm hooked up with Jason and some other researchers at Lancaster, and so I do participate in some of that work. I also interact in my education work a lot with farmers and consultants and other extension educators, and we've had a number of collaborative projects, most recently some with some of the dairy and livestock agents that have more nutrition, livestock and ruminant nutrition backgrounds. And I'll be talking about some of that work. I would invite you to look at the website of our nutrient pest management program. I did have that link up earlier, the ipcm.wisc.edu, to find some of the publications that have come out of some of this work with Ryan and Triticale. Just want to put in a plug for an article I had in Forage Dairyman just this past December. Winter cereal for forage offers farms options. A lot of the information contained in the article I'll be covering today as well. So rye or triticale for forage, generally speaking, yield and quality both can be quite variable. We're talking probably somewhere from 1 to 3 tons of dry matter per acre, harvested in that boot to early heading stage of growth. It's kind of a narrow window to attain that optimal quality in terms of protein and digestible fiber and energy content, pretty close to that boot stage of growth, which is the point at which the flag leaf has emerged and just prior to the seed head emerging from the stem. Rye and triticale, from what we found, generally have a similar yield and quality, except triticale can be about 5 to 10 days later. A lot of farmers that have worked a lot with triticale, more experienced than I, have suggested that triticale does have a little longer harvest window than rye. So to meet the optimum, rather than 1 to 3 days, depending on weather, maybe 3 to 5 or 6 days. Weather will drive that. If we have warm weather and ample moisture, it's going to be quicker than if it's a little cooler. These forages are most often fed to dairy heifers. They do have an adequate nutrient profile for growth, balanced with a little additional energy probably, but also provide a bulky feed ingredient to limit feed intake and excessive weight gain. So there are a number of dairy farms that are using rye to provide 100% of the forage in the ration for heifers of certain size classes. It can be used in milk cow rations. It's an excellent source of digestible fiber, again, with a high NDFD. We found up to, through some ration simulation modeling and some on-farm work, up to about 1/3 of the forage dry matter possible with good quality silage in particular. These are 2 graphs put together by Wayne Koblenz, who is a researcher with the USDA Dairy Forage Research Center. He's based at the Lancaster Research Station with Jason Cavallini. And this just shows the relationship between forage quality and from 2 years of research with triticale field trials at Marshfield. So the relationship between forage quality expressed as total digestible nutrients and dry matter yield. And that intersection of optimum tends to be, again, at that boot stage, or I think it's the Zadok's growth stage 50, which in Wisconsin tends to be somewhere between the 2nd and the 4th week in May, depending upon whether you're in the north or the south and the year. But as you can see, much after that growth stage 50, there is a lot of yield potential, but we do start to sacrifice some of that quality. And so at that stage, what Wayne is showing here is, somewhere between 1 and 2 ton of dry matter per acre with the Triticale. There is an approach to using till holding off harvest until much later, till kind of the soft dough stage, or maybe milk stage, or just past that soft dough stage, at which point the energy concentration starts to go up. So forage quality starts to regain itself and sort of offset some of the fiber accumulation associated with the additional yield. However, this is going to be much later, probably the end of June, early July. And at that point, it limits the options for a subsequent crop to maybe something like sorghum Sudan grass, but or annual small grains or something like that, which would be better planted a little bit later in the season. So something to think about. However, most farmers don't, they don't want to do that. They want to get this off and get corn planted, or maybe soybeans or alfalfa back in time. Farmers we work with really want to kind of get the rye harvested before first crop alfalfa even. Get it out of the way, finish planting corn, and then get into alfalfa. Also, cutting and harvesting 5 ton of dry matter in windrows can be a feeding situation too. So not maybe the most desirable. I wanted to share a little bit of forage quality data that we've collected from. This has been mostly from farms. There's been a little bit here from Arlington and Lancaster, but these are from fermented samples, mostly out of storage on the farms that have participated in Wisconsin. We have some from 2018 and 2019. Most of the samples have been rye. But the point is, our forage quality comparisons have been pretty similar, especially for protein and NDF, a little higher in fiber digestibility for Triticale, and then resulting in a little higher RFQ and milk per ton of dry matter. Some of that is because in some of the on-farm comparisons we've had, it just works out that we cut the rye, or the cooperating farmer cuts the rye and the Triticale at the same time. So the Triticale is probably a little less mature and thus a little bit, lower in fiber, a little higher quality there. So probably a little lower yield, but a little higher quality at this time. Potassium levels can be a little high, as can ash, the ash content of cereal grain forages. And so we do recommend a wet chemistry analysis when sending in those forage samples on the minerals, and then consulting a nutritionist on the results to make sure we don't run into issues with hypocalcemia.
Hey, Kevin.
Yes.
There's a question that came in about, evaluating differences between rye and Triticale varieties, because now there's, specialty rye and Triticale varieties that are bred specifically for forage. Has that been taken into account? Are you aware, or?
Not in anything that I've talked about so far. I'm going to talk about a trial that I've had here at Arlington now, getting into this next slide. And then a spin-off of that trial has involved some of the KWS hybrid forage ryes. So I have limited experience with that, but I will be talking about that in a little bit. I have not worked with any of the hybrid or forage type triticales.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks.
Thank you. So yes, these are the results from a trial that I've been running at the Arlington Research Station. This is South Central Wisconsin, about 20 miles north of Madison. And this shows dry matter yield results from 2012 through 2016 for corn silage and rilage. So in this treatment, we had 3 main treatments with 3 replications each. And originally it had a nitrogen rate component to it as well. I'm not talking about that today, but so we had corn silage just by itself, corn silage followed by a rye cover crop, and then corn silage followed by rye planted for forage. And this is a continuous corn silage rotation in this field. So, the corn silage with rye would have had rye planted after corn silage harvest, then the rye forage was harvested, and then corn silage was planted back again, and that continued for all 5 of these years. And so the average yields are presented here below the bar graph. But what you can see in the bar graph is the yellow is the corn silage yields, the orange is corn silage following the rye cover crop, and the dark blue is the corn silage that followed the rye forage crop, and then the light blue is the rye forage crop. So there was definitely a yield decrease associated with corn silage planted after rye forage. Not really so much with corn silage planted after a early terminated rye cover crop. But with respect to the corn silage that followed the rye forage crop, the rye forage tended to equalize or more than make up for that yield reduction associated with the rye forage itself. Some of the years in that trial, the rye forage was harvested. I should say that the rye cover crop was chemically terminated in late April, and then the corn was no-till planted shortly after. At the same time in the rye cover as in the no rye at all. And then the corn that was planted for silage in the rye forage treatment would have been planted a little bit later, right? Because we had to let the rye grow and harvest the rye forage. But some years it just seemed to work out due to weather and such that everything got planted all at the same time. All the corn was planted at the same time. And so the results tended to be the same. We tended to have a little bit of a yield reduction in that corn following rye forage, which is shown here on the left of this slide, even if it was planted at the same time as the corn planted after a rye cover crop, which is represented on the right side of this slide. And so, and this is the same field. So on the right-hand side, you can see the corn where the rye cover crop was, and the rye forage crop was on the left. And so there is some early vigor that seems to be sacrificed by whatever it is, some allelopathy, some nitrogen immobilization. The soil generally tends to be a little tighter, a little bit more compact, especially in a dry year. Seed slot closure tends to be more of a challenge when no-till planting into this rye forage stubble. And so what we always did was we tended to take the rye forage off and then no-till right back into the stubble and chemically terminate the regrowth after planting. Usually the corn was not emerged yet, but it is glyphosate tolerant corn. So I'm gonna talk a little bit more later about some things to just kind of try to mediate some of these effects, but it is a significant observation. So here are some partial budgets that I put together based on what I've seen over the years in terms of yields for corn silage in a continuous corn rotation with no rye, corn silage after rye harvested as forage, alfalfa with a 4-year stand of alfalfa, and 2 different ryeage scenarios, one at a 1 ton of dry matter per acre yield and one at 2 ton of dry matter per acre yield. And so if you go all the way down to the bottom and you look at what I have for a cost per ton of dry matter forage, you can see that the ryeage is definitely the highest cost on a per ton of dry matter basis, especially if we're only getting 1 ton dry matter per acre on that. And then in terms of value or revenue, it's always a little bit hard to assign a value to some of these alternative forages. In this case, I am using quality tested hay auction values from this last year. And so I have alfalfa and rye, and the rye is assumed to be a grade 2 with a relative forage quality between 103 and 124, which is based on kind of a combination of the results I had in the trial and what we saw from the on-farm sampling that we did. And so I've got that at $140 per ton. Corn silage, I'm using an app that we have available from UW Extension on pricing corn silage, and I've got that at $95 per ton. So you can see the revenue values that I have there, and subtracting the annual costs. Again, comparing the corn silage after rye, which takes a little bit of a hit compared to the corn silage with no rye, but when you add the value of that 2 ton of rye forage per acre, it again more than makes up for it, and makes it a little bit attractive compared to the corn silage alone. If we're only getting 1 ton of dry matter per acre, the economics are not in its favor. In this case, I worked with our now retired dairy nutritionist, ruminant nutritionist in the Department of Dairy Science, UW-Madison, Randy Shaver, and a PhD student, Rafael Caputo, and also Matt Akins, who was on your program, I believe, earlier today, and a couple of county educators. And we used some of that forage quality data, the rye data that I showed earlier, and then we also worked with 2 cooperating dairy farms that were feeding a fair amount of ryeage to their lactating cows. And I worked with their dairy nutritionists, and we got milk production data from those farms along with complete ration formulation data for a period of time, and ran everything through the AMTS dairy feed formulation software just to model some what the potential outcomes could be from different scenarios of adding more ryeage or taking ryeage out, to see what the impact on milk production and income over feed costs would be. And the income over feed cost part used the cost per ton of dry matter estimates that I presented in the previous slide. So what we found there generally is this table has 3 different rations. It's got ration 1 and 2, which had no ryeage Ration one is the forage component is made up of half corn silage and half alfalfa haylage, a little more corn silage in ration two. Those are resulting in about 90 pounds per day of milk production with an income over feed cost, something over $9 per day per cow. And when we added some rilage, in one case, ration three, we have about a third each of corn silage, haylage, and rilage. And ration four is about half corn silage and half rilage. And you look down below, and we kind of separated out our different forage quality classes of rilage that we had. And you can see we maintained milk production at about 90 pounds per head per day, and income over feed costs, again, at a little over $9 per head. As long as we were in that forage quality, relative forage quality in kind of a high range, right around 145. As we went down to 113 or even lower, we started to sacrifice some production, and our income over feed costs was compromised. These are, I think we had 6 or 8 total rations that we evaluated. I just pulled out 4 of them here for ease of presentation, but it tended to be easier to replace alfalfa haylage than corn silage with the rilage. That's the other thing I can say, but it had to be fairly high quality. Okay, this is what I was talking about before. So one of those 2 dairy farms that we worked with, is feeding some rilage to their lactating cows. They like it, but they really like it as a heifer feed. They're planting most of their corn silage acres with it, and they're planting quite a few acres after alfalfa hay with it too. So like in that 4th or 5th year of hay, they're going to take off a couple cuttings, and then I can't remember if they're putting manure on. They might be putting some manure on, and then they're terminating and no-tilling some rye in there and getting good yields with that. With the rye forage after corn silage, it's that 1 ton of dry matter, maybe 2 ton of dry matter, but they'd really like to see something with a little higher yield potential. And they asked me, well, is there, what could we take a look at? And so I had become aware of some of these hybrid forage ryes. We did have a trial at Arlington back in 2018, but unfortunately they didn't compare it to any conventional rye. The yields look good, but I said, why don't we see if we can get some of this seed and put it out in an on-farm comparison? Would you be interested in that? And they were, and so I contacted KWS, worked with Klaus Nyman and his associate Becca there, and they donated some seed. And so we put in, it was about a 15-acre field, and it was about a third of the ProGas hybrid rye. And so we had 2 reps of each in this on-farm demo. And here are the average results. The ProGas did, first of all, our yields were a little lower than we hoped for. And I would say that it was pretty obvious they didn't have quite enough manure on that field. It looked like it was nitrogen short. And so I think that did compromise the yield of both the conventional and the ProGas. But the ProGas was a little bit higher in yield. Protein probably, most of the quality components were really very similar. A little higher in milk per acre just because of that slightly higher yield. But this was planted on September 10th of 2018 and harvested, cut the following May 22nd. Conventional rye was late boot, early heading, and the ProGas hybrid rye was still pre-boot. Heads were about 2 inches below the top of the stem, and it was a little bit shorter at that time. So it was cut, probably a little sooner than it should have been. But in the minds of these farmers, it was time to cut. Most of their rye was at cutting time. And again, they wanted to get it cut so they could get the rest of their crops planted and their hay made. There was a 3-inch rain between cutting and chopping in this case too. So I think that reduced the quality just a little bit, but it looked pretty good coming off of the field. This actually was a determining factor for the cooperating farmer. And unfortunately, I didn't do any actual ground cover estimates or any sort of biomass quantity clippings or anything, but these pictures were taken on November 8th of 2018. 6-7 weeks after planting. And on the left is the KWS ProGas hybrid, and which was seeded at 44 pounds per acre. So that was about the recommended seeding rate per acre, and we were about 100 pounds of pure live seed on the conventional rye. And part of the reason for doing this on this farmer's part, as it is on others, is for that overwintering ground cover. And the hybrid rye is, it's a little more expensive. The economics suggest the lower seed rate. Also, it's touted as having a much greater tillering trait associated with it. So it tillers a lot. But from my observations, most of that tillering, depending on when it's planted, maybe you need to plant it a little earlier than the end of September in southern Wisconsin, but most of that tillering will occur in the spring. So just given the higher seeding cost, but I think that would it would pay for itself in terms of yield and quality if we were able to let it go a little bit longer. But the cooperator was, like to see a little bit more cover out there, fall into winter and over winter. So that's the first situation. I also had access this last year to, I've been doing some different things in that Arlington trial. And so what I did this year was I split those rye forage strips and with half conventional rylage. Sorry. Yeah, that should actually say Spooner rye instead of conventional VNS rylage. So that was Spooner versus, I'm sorry, got a mistake in this slide. I believe the data is correct, but this should say Spooner rye versus hybrid forage rye. And this year it was Pro Power rather than ProGas. So this is Spooner versus Pro Power. Again, my yields were a little disappointing on both, and I'm going to say more about that in a minute. And it was pretty similar. Again, the ProGas is described to me as being a little later than the Pro Power, which is what this is described as being a little later than the ProGas. If anyone from KWS Cereals is on and I'm wrong about that, they can correct me, or maybe Margaret can. But yeah, so again here, similar to Triticale, a little better in digestible fiber and a little higher in total digestible nutrients and relative forage quality. But again, the Spooner rye was at 119 pounds per acre seeding rate. The Pro Power was at 66. That's what we ended up with. I think that's a little higher than the recommended seeding rate. The harvest date was May 21st, and again, that spooner was late boot to early heading, and the Pro Power was pre-boot. So we took it at the same time, very similar to the on-farm trial we had the previous year. Although the Pro Power really was a little taller than the spooner at this point. So this is a picture. Here it doesn't look taller, but the Pro Power is on the right and the spooner is on the left. And you know, it just, again, I don't have I have yield data, but I did not have any fall biomass or ground cover measurements. But what we did this year was we harvested the corn in fall of 2019. Is we harvested the corn silage. I think it was September 26th. And we planted the rye directly after that corn silage harvest the same day. So rather than, what we usually do is harvest the silage, put manure on, wait for the ground to dry out from 10,000 gallons per acre of manure. Hopefully it doesn't rain. And then we go in and no-till the rye in. Well, we've been trying to come up with some strategies to get the rye planted sooner. So we planted the rye right away, and then we went in with a low disturbance manure injector and put the manure on afterwards. Well, it really, I think it did compromise the stand of the rye to some extent. And I think that's why we had the lower than desirable yield. So with respect to those hybrid forage ryes, in the first case, I'm going to say it was mostly nitrogen deficiency. And in the second case, it was a compromised stand. Matt, do you have a question?
Yeah, Kevin, I just, I wanted to give Margaret a chance to give a little context about that too. I think she'd probably agree with some of your observations there, but yeah, I mean, managing hybrid rye is definitely a different proposition than managing traditional VNS or open pollinated rye. And I just wanted to give Margaret a chance to weigh in there to give that a little context too.
Well, I don't want to interrupt you, Kevin. I know you and I've talked about this data before. This is great data. I'm so glad you've done this work. You know, there is a big difference in dry matter yield between the two stages you're describing. And this is always the challenge in looking at small grains, right? People want to cut all at the same day. But, you know, between early boot and late boot stage, that's when that growth really starts to skyrocket. And so, yeah, I'd really love to see these cut at the same stage of growth. But your point is, you know, perhaps Pro Gas or Pro Power are too late maturing if farmers really want to get that off there and get the corn silage planted. So yes, I think we could get more yield out of it, but it may or may not fit their cropping system.
Yeah, you know, especially if you're going to plant corn afterwards again, if you're going to plant soybeans or probably even alfalfa, I think it's less of an issue. And then I'm going to offer some BMPs here. Hopefully I'm going to have enough time. But, you know, I think planting date in the fall, the earlier we can get these things planted in the fall so that we get, you know, adequate tillering. So come spring, we don't have a lot more tillering to do. We can launch right into stem elongation. Is going to help get us to that stage at an earlier date, you know, maybe a week earlier. Fertility is going to make a big difference, particularly nitrogen. So optimal management on various fronts, I think, is what we need to help that, whether it's conventional rye or trit or a hybrid rye that might be a little bit later.
I would agree, Kevin, because if we can't get up to about that 2 ton per acre yield, as you showed in your earlier data and economic analyses, it may not be a viable system.
Maybe not. And I used that quality tested hay auction data to come up with a value for the rye. Well, are you really tight on forage going into the year? If you are, the value and the market for hay is going to be higher. How much value do you place on that soil conservation and soil health component that you can get by having a continuous living cover over the winter? So these are all factors that come into the equation. But yeah, you're right, Margaret. So this is, and I'm struggling a little bit to think about where I came up with that height data on this trial, but I did dig up some plants here and just took some pictures from this 2020 trial in Arlington. On the left, I have some Spooner rye. There's 4 plants there, at least in these specimens. They are a little taller than the Pro Power on the right, but just to show that Pro Power really does tiller a little bit more, it appears about 7 to 8 tillers per plant versus 2 to 5 tillers on the Spooner. So somehow we have to kind of capitalize on that. Just an observation I thought I'd share. So I'd like to offer some best management practices for winter cereal forages, both economic and environmental, kind of summing up a lot of both the sort of subjective or qualitative and quantitative experience I've had here. Yield goal, we need to try to aim for 2 ton of dry matter per acre. That's going to require planting in September, probably early September, particularly as we move north from southern Wisconsin. We could probably go up to the 4th week in southern Wisconsin, but not really into October, I would say. Earlier is better in September. And that's both to optimize overwinter cover and spring forage yield. We want to try to avoid a planting delay caused by manure application. Consider strategies for planting first, then applying manure before emergence or into the growing cover crop. And I really don't have any good recommendations on that. I know it's being done. There's a lot of innovations in low disturbance manure application equipment now. And I think we've got some farmers in the northeastern part of our state that are doing it successfully. Just something to kind of keep in mind here. Planting rate, 90 to 110 pounds per acre for forage with the conventional seeds, only 40 to 60 pounds per acre if we're just going to use it as a cover. We want to provide 60 to 70 pounds of N from fertilizer or manure for optimal forage yield and quality. Probably want to harvest at the boot or late boot stage for optimal quality, particularly if it's intended for lactating cows. It's a little more forgiving if it's going to be for heifers, or I do know several farms that are feeding it to gestating beef cows also. We just have to worry about once they get close to calving. I mean, milk fever isn't quite the issue with beef cattle as it is with dairy, but keep that in mind. Harvest early with a good weather window is what the farmers have told us, just to reduce the risk for the quality decline with a weather delay, both before it's cut and after it's cut, laying in a windrow. It's hard to dry down once it's in a windrow. We recommend, laying it out flat to help drying as much as possible. We want to avoid chopping and siling at moistures above 70% moisture. Avoid ash contamination when cutting and harvesting. So try to, minimize the contact with the soil and manure that was applied if it was no-till last fall, it can be an issue. Be careful how we're, raking it and merging it and everything. And avoid feeding it to dry cows or close heifers when they're, in the probably 45 to 60 days before calving. Corn yield is often suppressed when following rye or triticale harvested as forage. So we might consider planting alfalfa or soybeans rather than corn. Generally, alfalfa has worked out pretty well. We did have one year that really stood out. I think it was maybe 2015. We ran into a number of cases where we had alfalfa planted after rye harvested as forage, and there was apparent allelopathic impact on the rye seeding. I mean, it was nothing. It was like 2 or 3 cases. So it was kind of a perfect storm of events with rain and temperatures and the type of tillage. And so there are kind of some BMPs that we would offer for planting alfalfa after either rye as a cover, or particularly rye harvested as forage. Consider time, temperature, moisture, tillage, soil mixing, that sort of thing. And I think, there are some ideas about considering rye forage with other annual forages like sorghum, sudan grass. I think it's something we need to just take more of a look at. So my summary and conclusions, a timely planting of winter rye or triticale as an overwintering cover crop following corn silage harvest and manure applications can be an effective management practice towards achieving a farm's stewardship goals and meeting soil and water conservation requirements. With good production and harvest management and cooperative weather, rye or triticale planted after corn silage can also provide an economically beneficial source of forage for dairy heifers, milking cows, and other cattle as well. Forage yield and quality can be variable, making economic results sometimes marginal, and will further depend on a farm's forage needs. The farmers do acknowledge additional value in soil and water conservation and opportunities provided by the cover crops in nutrient management, no-till planting, and building soil health. So with that, you might have a couple minutes for questions, and please feel free to contact me later for questions, criticisms, thoughts, ideas. I'd love to hear from you.
Great. Thank you, Kevin, for your presentation and for your time today and putting this together. We really appreciate it. So yeah, we've got a couple minutes until 2 o'clock when our program concludes. So if anybody's got any outstanding questions, please feel free to type them into the chat bar. Kevin's got his contact up there as well. So if you have additional questions after you think of something later today, you can drop him a line about that as well. And just as a reminder to everybody, said this a couple times before, but we will be archiving all these presentations on our website. Should be up hopefully within 2 or 3 weeks or so, but they will be up in case you missed any presentations from today. There was a comment on the chat bar, kind of more just a reflection on, that a lot of these crops in rotation are definitely part of a system more than, trying to maximize yield of every single component of the crop rotation. And you might give yourself more options if you, for example, shorten the maturity on your corn or your soybean variety, and it kind of gives you more windows of opportunity in the entire system, which I thought was a good comment. Do you have any add-ons to that, Kevin?
No, but I have a couple of different versions of this presentation, and if it wasn't in this one, I have it in another one that might be a consideration. I mean, this is still kind of a simplistic one within a given system, but I know in Wisconsin, Joe Lauer runs the hybrid evaluation trials, and he does a silage trial. And if you look at the results of those trials, there are a number of forage or silage or kind of dual purpose hybrids entered usually that are in the shorter maturities that have just as good a yield potential as some of the later maturing hybrids. So, they may have better quality characteristics too. So you need to evaluate the hybrids both in terms of yield potential and quality and other characteristics, and kind of match that to the system. But I think there is strong merit to this type of a system with a cereal grain or a cereal forage planted afterwards to selecting a earlier maturing corn hybrid. I should have said that.
Yeah, good call out. And I would just mention too, this isn't exclusive to certified organic producers, but being that we serve quite a number of certified organic producers, they often plant, hybrids and varieties that are shorter maturing than, a lot of their conventional neighbors. And there is a lot of very competitive earlier maturing hybrids that can fit particular systems and even compete for yield or agronomic characteristics with, later maturing material. So, I mean, later maturity is not always equivalent to top end yields or, best agronomic characteristics. So it's definitely a farm to farm and system to system conversation, but definitely one that we see bear out with, namely certified organic folks, but it would certainly apply to conventional rotations as well.
Right, and just to say again, to evaluate those hybrids both in terms of yield and quality, if you can, for a silage situation in particular.
Yeah, thanks for that. All right. Well, with that, I think we can conclude today's program. Again, want to appreciate or just say thank you to everyone for joining us today, and to all of our speakers for being a part of our program. We really appreciate that. I will just do a call out again for tomorrow, same time, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. We're having an entire program on small grains. So the forage component won't be a big part of the discussion. It'll mainly be small grains taken for grain, but hope that you can join us tomorrow. If you haven't, take a moment to pre-register. And for everyone else, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in the spring.